deep within the hushed, primeval forests of the American Pacific Northwest, where ancient trees claw at perpetually overcast skies and mist clings like a phantom limb, a legend stirs. For generations, chilling whispers have slithered through these verdant canyons, tales of a colossal, bipedal creature, half man, half ape, a phantom of the wilderness known simply as Bigfoot. Millions dismiss it as folklore, a campfire story born of shadows and fear. But what if the legend was not only real, but dramatically understated? What if, in a clandestine operation that defied belief, a decorated U.S. Army colonel didn't just glimpse this elusive behemoth, but actually captured one alive? And what if the words spoken by this creature, not in human tongue but through a profound ancient essence, shattered his world and irrevocably altered humanity's understanding of its place on Earth? This is not a fanciful tale. This is the staggering, untold account of Colonel David Hayes and the Sasquatch that forever changed his life, and potentially ours. Meet Colonel David Hayes, a name that echoed with quiet authority within the most clandestine chambers of the United States military. Hayes was no ordinary officer. His distinguished career was a tapestry woven with threads of valor, sharp intellect, and an almost obsessive pursuit of truth, often through unconventional means. A veteran of countless shadowed conflicts, his reputation preceded him. Unflappable under pressure, fiercely intelligent, and possessing an uncanny ability to sift through chaos to pinpoint the core of any mystery. His colleagues often quipped that Hayes didn't just follow orders. He deciphered the unspoken anxieties behind them. Currently, he found himself stationed at a remote, nondescript military installation, nestled dangerously close to the vast, untamed wilderness of the Olympic National Forest, a region ripe with unexplained phenomena. His official mandate was vaguely defined, focusing on anomalous terrestrial reports, a bureaucratic euphemism for anything the Pentagon couldn't neatly categorize. The year was 2007. A disquieting pattern had begun to emerge from the dense labyrinth of the forest, escalating from isolated incidents into a full-blown crisis that had local authorities baffled and increasingly terrified. Hunters, hikers, and even seasoned park rangers were vanishing without a trace. Not just one or two, but a disturbing number of disappearances in a highly localized, particularly impenetrable sector of the forest known locally as the Blackwood Scar. Search parties, armed with state-of-the-art equipment and grim determination, returned empty-handed, their faces etched with a gnawing unease. Dogs whimpered and refused to enter certain areas, their hackles raised at unseen threats. Campers reported inexplicable, guttural vocalizations that seemed to shake the very ground beneath their sleeping bags, sounds unlike any known animal. Locals, already steeped in the region's ancient lore, began to whisper of an ancient, unknown creature, a presence that had awakened and was now reclaiming its territory. These were not the ramblings of superstitious hermits. These were terrified testimonies from rational, resilient people. Hayes, initially skeptical, found his scientific curiosity piqued. The sheer volume and consistency of the reports, coupled with the complete lack of conventional explanations, pointed to something far beyond a mere serial predator or a lost hiker. The military, ever vigilant for potential threats, even ones that sounded like fanciful campfire stories, had tasked him with discreetly investigating. He devoured every filed report, every cryptic witness statement, every grainy, inconclusive photo. The official summaries were dry, clinical. Yet beneath the bureaucratic jargon, Hayes sensed a palpable fear, a desperate plea for understanding. This wasn't just a police matter. It felt like humanity brushing against the edge of something profoundly ancient and disturbingly powerful. The air in his office, usually crisp with the scent of ozone and stale coffee, now seemed thick with the weight of unseen possibilities. He knew, with an instinct honed by years of facing the impossible, that he was on the precipice of something monumental. The question wasn't if something was out there, but what, and more importantly, why it was now making its presence undeniably known. The stage was set for an encounter that would redefine not just cryptozoology, but humanity itself. Don't miss a single moment of this unbelievable, paradigm-shifting story. Subscribe to our channel now and hit that notification bell so you don't miss any of the shocking revelations to come. Colonel Hayes, driven by an unwavering resolve that had defined his storied career, wasted no time in assembling his elite, covert reconnaissance team. These weren't just soldiers. They were trackers, survivalists, and intelligence operatives, each handpicked for their unique blend of skill and discretion. Their objective was clear yet daunting: penetrate the veil of mystery shrouding the remote Pacific Northwest forest and uncover the truth behind the unsettling reports. Their initial expeditions, however, yielded not answers, but an escalating sense of unease. The team's first forays into the dense ancient woods were met with an eerie quiet, a silence that felt less like peace and more like watchful anticipation. Days blurred into weeks, marked by the methodical sweep of their patrols and the meticulous documentation of their findings. They discovered footprints unlike any known animal, impossibly large, and possessing an anatomical structure that defied conventional zoology. These weren't merely imprints. They were declarations, left with an almost deliberate weight, appearing and disappearing in ways that baffled even the most seasoned trackers. Strange vocalizations, deep and guttural, sometimes echoing from unseen distances, sent shivers down their spines and forced them to question every rustle in the undergrowth. These were not the sounds of known wildlife. They possessed a resonant quality, a primal intelligence that hinted at something ancient and profoundly powerful. More disturbing still was the unexplainable damage to the environment. Trees, some of them centuries old, were snapped cleanly in half, their massive trunks twisted with a force that seemed impossible for any natural phenomenon, or even a bear. Rocks weighing hundreds of pounds were inexplicably moved, forming what sometimes appeared to be crude markers or even rudimentary barricades. The air itself seemed to hum with an unseen energy, a constant feeling of being observed, even when their advanced sensors showed no presence. A growing unease began to creep into the team's professional composure. Seasoned veterans, men and women who had faced down combat zones, found themselves experiencing a fear they hadn't known since their first tour of duty. It was the fear of the unknown, of something powerful enough to manipulate its environment in ways they couldn't comprehend, yet elusive enough to remain perpetually out of reach. Whispers of Bigfoot started circulating, no longer as a legend, but as a chilling possibility, a palpable presence lurking just beyond their sensory perception. The protagonist of their mounting anxiety, the elusive Sasquatch itself, gradually began to take shape, not as a physical entity they could capture, but as an intelligent, powerful, and nearly invisible force. It was portrayed in their minds not just as a beast, but as a cunning entity that seemed to be observing them. A master of camouflage and stealth. The forest, once merely a backdrop for their mission, transformed into an antagonist in its own right. Its vastness swallowed their signals, its unpredictable terrain thwarted their advances, and its ancient canopy seemed to conspire with the unseen entity shielding it from their gaze. Every shadow held a potential secret, every broken branch a silent message. The team, accustomed to imposing their will on their surroundings, found themselves increasingly at the mercy of the wilderness. Hayes, never one to give in to frustration, redoubled his efforts. He believed that the answer lay in pushing the boundaries of military science. He implemented every advanced tracking technology at their disposal. Thermal imaging drones, once used for spotting enemy insurgents, now swept the cold forest nights, their infrared eyes searching for anomalous heat signatures. Sonic detectors, capable of picking up the faintest vibrations and vocalizations, were deployed across vast grids, their sophisticated algorithms trained to filter out known animal calls and isolate anything unusual. High-altitude drone surveillance provided comprehensive topographical mapping, hoping to identify patterns of movement or hidden lairs that ground teams might miss. The pressure from his superiors was mounting. General Sterling, a man of rigid protocols and concrete results, demanded progress. Hayes's reports, filled with circumstantial evidence and unsettling anomalies, were met with skepticism and veiled threats of mission termination. Each failed attempt at definitive contact or capture only fueled the frustration, escalating the stakes with every passing day. The creature, it seemed, was always one step ahead, a phantom in the foliage, a whisper in the wind. Hayes felt the weight of expectation, not just from the chain of command, but from the inexplicable draw of the mystery itself, a pull that promised profound secrets if only he could break through the enigma. He knew this wasn't just about a mission anymore. It was about the very fabric of unexplained natural phenomena, and perhaps the true depth of humanity's understanding of its own world. The air in the Pacific Northwest forests thickened with an almost palpable anticipation as Hayes and his team pressed deeper, their advanced tracking technologies finally pointing towards a consistent, albeit deeply hidden, pattern of movement. The creature, or creatures, seemed to favor a particular section of the vast wilderness, a region marked on ancient, almost mythical maps as the Whispering Peaks, a place rarely trod by human feet. This wasn't merely a remote area, it was a labyrinth of ancient growth, colossal trees forming a canopy so dense that daylight struggled to pierce through, creating an eternal twilight beneath. The ground beneath their boots grew softer, covered in millennia of fallen leaves and decaying wood, muffling their progress. What they discovered there defied every established biological and geological expectation. Beneath the gnarled roots of ancient cedars, they found pathways, not merely animal trails, but distinct, almost deliberately cleared routes that wound through the underbrush with an intelligent design. These weren't random meanderings. They were paths indicating regular travel, efficient and purposeful. Further exploration revealed rock formations that appeared to be more than just natural occurrences. Large, flat stones arranged in concentric circles, partially overgrown with moss, hinting at structures, or perhaps even meeting places, that spoke of an intelligence far beyond animalistic instinct. The team exchanged uneasy glances, the implications dawning on them. This was not just a beast, but a sentient being, one that understood its environment with an intimacy humans had long forgotten. Colonel Hayes, observing these subtle yet profound signs, felt a shift within himself. His military training, his logical mind, screamed for scientific explanation, for classification. But the sheer antiquity, the profound silence of these hidden spaces, resonated with something primal, something that whispered of ancient wisdom. He knew, with an unsettling certainty, that direct confrontation, armed to the teeth, was not just ineffective but perhaps profoundly disrespectful. A different approach was needed, one that blurred the lines between military strategy and something akin to a grand, dangerous chess match. Against every standard operating procedure, against the very protocols he had sworn to uphold, Hayes began to devise a plan for capture. Not eradication, but containment. He envisioned a non-lethal trap, an elaborate mechanism that would allow them to secure the creature alive without injury to finally understand. The very idea was audacious, bordering on professional suicide, but the strange intelligence emanating from the ancient forest demanded it. His team, though initially skeptical, trusted Hayes implicitly. They had seen him face danger, outthink adversaries, and always lead with a clear, unwavering purpose. The construction of the containment unit became a monumental undertaking. Deep within the Whispering Peaks, they identified a natural clearing, sheltered by towering rock faces and shrouded by thick vegetation. Here, under the cloak of night and the dense canopy, they began assembling a massive, reinforced steel structure, camouflaged meticulously with local foliage. It was designed to resemble a natural rock outcrop, blending seamlessly into the environment. Its walls were triple-layered, capable of withstanding immense force, and the entry mechanism was a marvel of silent, automated engineering, triggered by a sophisticated array of pressure plates and thermal sensors. Every detail was meticulously planned, every possible contingency considered. The sheer scale of the operation was staggering, a testament to the resources Hayes commanded and the unwavering belief he had instilled in his team. For weeks, the trap lay dormant, a silent, steel behemoth awaiting its quarry. The team maintained a painstaking stakeout, nestled in camouflaged hides several kilometers away, their breath hitched, their senses hyper-alert. They monitored the sensors, tracked the subtle shifts in the forest's energy, listened to the nuanced symphony of the wild. Days bled into nights, the tension a constant humming presence. Frustration mounted, punctuated by false alarms. Deer, elk, even a curious bear, all of which triggered the preliminary sensors, but failed to trip the main mechanism. Hayes remained resolute, his gaze fixed on the monitors, a man possessed by an almost spiritual quest. Then, on a night steeped in an eerie, unnatural quiet, it happened. The main thermal sensor flared, a massive heat signature moving with deliberate, unhurried grace towards the disguised opening. The pressure plates registered a colossal weight, far exceeding anything they had previously encountered. The cameras, operating on infrared, flickered to life, revealing a towering, broad-shouldered silhouette. It was immense, even larger than their most exaggerated estimates. There was a moment of absolute, heart-stopping silence as the creature stepped fully inside. Then, with a barely audible pneumatic hiss, the heavy steel door slammed shut, sealing the entrance. A guttural roar, primal and resonant, ripped through the silent forest, shaking the very ground beneath their feet. It was not a sound of fear, but of raw, untamed power, of ancient rage. The entire containment unit rattled, the reinforced steel groaning under an unseen force. Alarms blared softly in their earpieces, indicating extreme stress on the structure. Hayes, adrenaline coursing through his veins, stared at the monitor, mesmerized. The creature inside, now fully illuminated by the unit's internal low-frequency lights, stood defiant. Its eyes, even through the grainy infrared, burned with an intelligent fury. This was no mere animal caught in a cage. This was a being of profound strength and surprising intelligence, its power immediately evident in the tremors that continued to ripple through the earth. The Bigfoot was contained, but the struggle, they realized, had only just begun. The forest, which had been its sanctuary, now held it captive, but its spirit remained untamed. The team rushed towards the containment unit, their hearts pounding in their chests, a mixture of awe and trepidation washing over them. As they approached, the tremors subsided, replaced by an unsettling stillness. The guttural roars had ceased, leaving an eerie silence that felt heavier than the earlier struggle. Colonel Hayes led the way, his face a mask of intense focus, his hand unconsciously gripping the sidearm holstered at his hip, a gesture of instinct rather than necessity. They reached the reinforced structure, its massive steel panels now calm, bearing only minor scuffs and dents from the creature's initial powerful reactions. Through a series of optical ports, designed to withstand immense pressure and impact, they peered inside. The sight that greeted them was beyond anything any of them had ever imagined. Standing tall, perhaps 9 or 10 feet, the creature filled the space. Its fur, a deep, rich brown, almost black in places, was thick and matted, hinting at a life lived entirely in the wild. Its musculature was prodigious, rippling beneath the coarse hair, suggesting a power that defied conventional understanding of biology. But it wasn't the sheer size or strength that captivated them. It was the face, broad and powerful, yet strikingly expressive. The deep-set eyes, framed by heavy brow ridges, held an intensity that was almost unbearable. They were not the eyes of an animal, driven by primal instinct alone. These were eyes that had seen centuries, perhaps millennia. Eyes that held a profound ancient sorrow, a quiet dignity that was entirely unexpected. A collective gasp rippled through the observation team. This was not a monster. It was something far more complex, far more human-like in its silent contemplation. Scientists and linguists, previously kept in a state of high alert at a covert base camp several miles away, were quickly brought to the site under strict security protocols. Dr. Lena Petrova, a renowned primatologist with an expertise in nonverbal communication, and Dr. Eris Thorne, a theoretical linguist specializing in ancient and lost languages, were among the first to arrive. Petrova, usually unflappable, stood transfixed at the viewing port, her scientific objectivity momentarily overridden by sheer wonder. Thorne, ever the academic, immediately began to meticulously document every minute detail of the creature's posture, facial expressions, and subtle movements. Their initial attempts at communication were cautious, almost reverent. They began with universal gestures, open palms, slow blinks, non-threatening body language, broadcast through a reinforced viewing window. They played recordings of various animal vocalizations, from primate calls to forest sounds, hoping for a recognition, a response. Days turned into nights within the sterile confines of the observation room, the creature remaining largely silent, observing its captors with an unnerving calm. It would occasionally shift its immense weight, its gaze sweeping over each member of the observation team, a slow, deliberate assessment that made every person feel as if their innermost thoughts were being laid bare. It seemed to be studying of them, patiently waiting rather than reacting to their overtures. Its stoic demeanor began to wear on the team, creating a sense of frustration mixed with an ever-growing sense of inadequacy. How do you communicate with something so utterly alien, yet so strangely familiar? Colonel Hayes spent countless hours watching the creature, often alone, long after the scientists had retired for the night. He found himself drawn to its stillness, to the profound depth in its eyes. He felt a connection, a strange, unspoken understanding forming between them, entirely without words. One night, as the forest outside was plunged into the deepest silence, broken only by the distant hoot of an owl, Hayes sat in the dim light of the observation room, his gaze fixed on the creature inside. It was sitting now, cross-legged, its huge hands resting on its knees, a posture that resonated with an almost meditative calm. Suddenly, without warning, the creature slowly raised one of its massive hands. Its fingers, thick and powerful, moved with a surprising delicacy, tracing complex patterns in the air, patterns that seemed to shimmer with an unseen energy. Then, it began to emit a series of low, resonant sounds. These were not roars or grunts. They were deep, undulating tones, almost like a primordial chant, layered with subtle harmonics that seemed to vibrate directly through the very structure of the containment unit and into Hayes's chest cavity. The sounds were unlike anything recorded by their advanced audio equipment, carrying an ancient quality, a resonance that hinted at geological timescales. The gestures continued, intricate and deliberate, a silent language unfolding before Hayes's astonished eyes. They weren't random. They seemed to possess a narrative, a flow, a connection between each movement and the next. The sounds deepened, then rose in pitch, conveying an undeniable sense of meaning, even if that meaning was still beyond human comprehension. It was an unexpected breakthrough, a moment of profound, almost spiritual contact. The Bigfoot was finally attempting to communicate, not on human terms, but on its own, ancient, powerful terms. Hayes felt an electrifying jolt of realization. This was not just a creature. It was an entity, a being capable of profound thought and complex expression, and it was reaching out. The true journey, he now understood, was only just beginning. The guttural roar gradually subsided, replaced by a low, resonant growl that vibrated through the containment unit, a sound that seemed to bypass Hayes's ears and reverberate directly in his chest. He stood transfixed, watching the creature through the reinforced viewing panel, its immense form slowly settling into an almost meditative stillness. The raw power was still palpable, a coiled energy that threatened to erupt, but now, a profound intelligence shimmered in those dark, ancient eyes. Hayes felt an unbidden sense of connection, an almost magnetic pull towards the being he had spent months hunting. It was in this unnerving calm, as the last vestiges of adrenaline faded, that the true communication began, not with spoken words, but with something far more ancient and profound. A sudden, overwhelming rush of images, sensations, and emotions flooded Colonel Hayes's mind. It was as if a dam had broken, unleashing a torrent of information directly into his consciousness, bypassing the conventional pathways of language. He saw towering, primordial forests, heard the rush of forgotten rivers, felt the damp earth beneath his bare feet. He experienced a sense of profound peace, then an ache of loss, then a surge of quiet indignation. The Bigfoot hadn't spoken in English or any human tongue, but its message was clearer than any verbal pronouncement could have been. It was a voice from the deep past, a collective consciousness of its species, channeled through the eyes and silent presence of the creature before him. The creature's large, expressive hands began to move, not in frantic gestures of distress, but in slow, deliberate motions that seemed to paint stories in the air. Each movement was accompanied by another wave of mental imagery, synchronized perfectly with its low, rumbling vocalizations that now sounded less like growls and more like a resonant, complex form of song. Hayes struggled to process the sheer volume of information, his mind reeling under the nonverbal onslaught. He saw generations of Sasquatch, living in harmony with the vast wilderness, their lives interwoven with the cycles of nature. They were guardians, silent observers, caretakers of the Earth's most sacred places. Their history wasn't recounted with dates and battles, But with the changing seasons, the growth of ancient trees, the flow of pristine waters, he understood their ancient language was one of empathy, of shared experience, of silent understanding with the forest itself. They had witnessed the gradual encroachment of humanity, at first with quiet curiosity, then with growing concern, and finally with a deep, sorrowful resignation. The creature showed him scenes of vast, unbroken wilderness, teeming with life, and then, overlaid upon them, the stark, geometric lines of human expansion. Clear-cut forests, sprawling concrete cities, rivers choked with industry. The contrast was devastating, a visual elegy for a world receding. Through these transmitted thoughts, Hayes grasped the Sasquatch's perspective on humanity. They saw humans as children, gifted with immense potential and a spark of incredible ingenuity, yet tragically blind to the consequences of their actions. They observed humanity's relentless need to dominate, to consume, to reshape the world in its own image, without understanding the delicate balance it was disrupting. The Bigfoot conveyed a profound understanding of cyclical existence, birth, death, renewal, and humanity's dangerous illusion of linear progress, a path that led only further away from the source of life itself. Hayes felt a deep shame wash over him, a realization that his own species was viewed not as a conqueror, but as a bewildered, destructive toddler wielding a powerful, dangerous tool. Then came the warning, stark and chilling, delivered with an intensity that made Hayes physically recoil. It wasn't a threat, but a profound lamentation, a sorrowful prediction. The Bigfoot foresaw a future where humanity's insatiable appetite would devour not only the forests and the rivers, but ultimately itself. The creature projected images of a world choked by its own waste, a sky poisoned, oceans barren. It showed the breakdown of human societies, driven by scarcity and desperation, a bitter harvest reaped from seeds of avarice and disconnection. The telepathic message was clear. Humanity was on a catastrophic trajectory, accelerating towards a precipice of its own making. The Bigfoot pleaded, not with words, but with the raw, heartfelt emotion of its ancient soul, for a return to balance, to respect, to an understanding of the interconnected web of life. It spoke, through its unspoken language, of the critical juncture humanity now faced, a choice between continuing down the path of destruction or rediscovering its inherent connection to the earth. The creature's eyes, filled with an unimaginable depth of sorrow and hope, conveyed a message far more potent than any military briefing, any scientific paper, or any religious text. It was a direct appeal from the heart of the wilderness, a primal wisdom echoing across millennia. Hayes stood there, silent and motionless. His mind expanded, his worldview shattered and reassembled in a matter of moments. The Bigfoot had revealed not just its species' story, but the story of the planet and humanity's place within it. He was no longer just a colonel observing a captured specimen. He was a student, receiving a profound, terrifying, yet ultimately hopeful lesson from an unexpected ancient teacher. The mission, he realized with a jolt, was no longer about containment or study. It was about listening, truly listening, to the wisdom that had been patiently waiting in the shadows of the forest for humanity to finally pay attention. The creature's words, though unheard by anyone else, had irrevocably altered his perception of reality, planting the seeds of an impossible, yet utterly necessary transformation within him. The creature's words, or more accurately, the complex tapestry of thoughts and emotions woven directly into Colonel Hayes's consciousness, had fundamentally shifted his world. His military resolve, once an unyielding fortress of logic, objective, and duty, began to fracture, replaced by an unfamiliar, unsettling sense of profound responsibility. He no longer viewed the entity before him as a biological specimen, a target for study, or even a formidable adversary to be contained. Instead, he saw a venerable, ancient being, burdened by wisdom and sorrow, a living testament to a history far deeper than any human record. This was not a beast. It was a sage, a guardian, and its message echoed in the deepest chambers of his soul. The weight of its telepathic account, the eons of peaceful coexistence, the silent observation of humanity's tempestuous rise, the poignant warnings of ecological imbalance, pressed down on him with crushing force. He found himself questioning every tenet of his past mission, every objective he had once held sacred. Was he a conqueror, a scientific pioneer, or an unwitting participant in a profound betrayal? The creature's eyes, which had initially met his with fury, now held a deep, knowing patience, as if understanding the turmoil it had wrought within him. Hayes felt a primal connection to its plight, a recognition of shared vulnerability, despite the vast chasm of species and experience that separated them. His internal struggle became a silent, agonizing battle, releasing the creature's true communications to the world, revealing its telepathic capabilities, and its damning indictment of humanity's trajectory would undoubtedly plunge society into chaos. Panic would erupt, followed by exploitation. Governments would seek to weaponize its potential. Corporations would try to monetize its wisdom. And the public, unprepared for such a paradigm shift, might react with fear and hostility. The creature itself, a sentinel of balance, would become a spectacle, its ancient lineage desecrated by human greed and misunderstanding. Yet, keeping this profound truth hidden felt like an even greater betrayal. How could he, having been privy to such vital insights, simply suppress them? It felt like condemning humanity to repeat its mistakes, to walk blindly towards the very precipice the Bigfoot had warned against. The creature's message wasn't just a warning, it was a plea, a desperate call for introspection and change, and Hayes felt an overwhelming moral obligation to heed it. He paced the sterile observation room, the muted hum of the life support systems, a stark contrast to the vibrant ancient forest that pulsed outside. The air, thick with the scent of ozone and the creature's faint, earthy musk, seemed to press in on him, amplifying his ethical dilemma. Meanwhile, a select group of the world's most brilliant minds had been quietly assembled, brought in under extreme secrecy. Unaware of the Bigfoot's communication with Hayes, they viewed the captive entity through the lens of pure scientific inquiry. For them, this was the crowning achievement of biological discovery, a living fossil, a potential missing link in the human evolutionary chain. They meticulously documented its physical attributes, analyzed its cellular structure, and theorized about its ecological niche. Linguists attempted to decipher its growls and vocalizations, convinced that with enough data, a pattern would emerge. They saw a monumental scientific breakthrough, a stepping stone to understanding life itself. Hayes knew their efforts, while noble in their scientific pursuit, were fundamentally misguided. The true value of the Bigfoot was not in its biology, but in its wisdom, in the ancient narratives it carried, in the profound message it had imparted. It was not a subject to be dissected and categorized, but a teacher, a living library of planetary memory. How could he reconcile the scientific community's legitimate, albeit narrow, quest for knowledge with his own deeply personal, almost spiritual understanding of its purpose? The creature's presence in their sterile confines felt increasingly wrong, an act of intellectual violence perpetuating the very disconnect it warned against. He observed the scientists, their faces alight with intellectual excitement, poring over data, drawing diagrams, proposing theories. He saw their genuine passion, their hunger for discovery, and felt a pang of guilt that he held a secret so vast, so transformative, that it would render their current endeavors almost trivial. He imagined telling them that their specimen had spoken telepathically, that it had articulated a coherent, sorrowful history of the planet and a dire prophecy for its future. They would dismiss him as mad, a victim of physiological stress or an elaborate delusion. The military, his superiors, would certainly agree. He was an officer of logic and order, not a mystic. The weight of this knowledge grew heavier with each passing hour. He felt like a custodian of a sacred trust, caught between the insatiable demands of scientific progress and the profound ecological imperative that the Bigfoot embodied. The concrete walls of the containment unit, once a symbol of his team's triumph, now felt like a prison, not just for the creature, but for the truth itself. The ethical dilemma was no longer an abstract concept. It was a palpable pressure, a suffocating force that threatened to crush his very spirit. He knew, with a certainty that transcended logic, that he could not allow this being to remain a captive. Its freedom and the preservation of its truth had become his new, unspoken, and utterly consuming mission. The path ahead was fraught with immense risk, potentially ending his career, his reputation, perhaps even his freedom. But the alternative, to ignore the wisdom bestowed upon him, felt like an unforgivable sin against life itself. Colonel Hayes felt an unprecedented clarity descend upon him. The scientific zeal, the military objectives, the career aspirations, all of it suddenly seemed insignificant, dwarfed by the enormity of the message he had received. He realized, with a chilling certainty, that his mission had been fundamentally flawed from its inception. He hadn't captured a cryptid. He had encountered an emissary, a venerable sentinel of an ancient world, and in doing so, had unwittingly violated a sacred trust. The very act of containment, of reducing such a being to a specimen, was an affront to its intrinsic wisdom and to the delicate balance of the natural world it represented. He understood now that studying the Bigfoot in the conventional scientific sense was not just an intellectual misstep, but a profound moral error. To continue holding it captive would be to perpetuate humanity's destructive pattern of exploitation, the very imbalance the creature had so sorrowfully warned against. Its message about humanity's relentless, selfish trajectory made any further scientific exploitation or public display unthinkable. This realization, sharp and undeniable, solidified into a monumental decision. The Bigfoot must be freed. The weight of this decision was immense. It meant subverting a top-secret military operation, risking court-martial, and potentially destroying his distinguished career. But the alternative? The thought of this ancient being, languishing in a sterile laboratory, its profound voice silenced by human arrogance, was intolerable. Hayes began to formulate a plan, a desperate gamble that required absolute secrecy and the unwavering loyalty of a select few. He knew he couldn't act alone, and he couldn't trust just anyone. He needed individuals who, like him, had felt the subtle, unsettling shift in their perspectives since the Bigfoot's arrival, those whose empathy outweighed their adherence to protocol. He identified Sergeant Miller, who had always possessed a quiet reverence for the wilderness, and Dr. Anya Sharma, the lead linguist, whose initial scientific curiosity had slowly evolved into a deep, almost spiritual fascination with the creature's silent intensity. He approached them cautiously, speaking in veiled terms at first, testing the waters, gauging their reactions. To his relief, they listened, their expressions shifting from surprise to a thoughtful, almost solemn understanding. They too felt the moral imperative, the undeniable tug of something greater than their orders. Together, they meticulously devised a scheme, cloaked in the bureaucratic fog of a classified operation. The cover story: a critical system malfunction within the containment unit, necessitating an immediate emergency evacuation and relocation of the specimen to a more secure, off-site facility. This would provide the perfect window of opportunity. Hayes fabricated a series of technical reports detailing escalating power fluctuations and structural instabilities, ensuring the narrative of a crumbling containment held water. Dr. Sharma created diversionary translation breakthroughs, feeding the other scientists tantalizing new data to keep them occupied and away from the critical area. Sergeant Miller, with his intimate knowledge of the base's security systems and the surrounding terrain, charted the most inconspicuous escape route through the dense forest, a path that would allow the Bigfoot to vanish without a trace. The night of the planned release was thick with an oppressive silence, broken only by the chirping of crickets and the distant hoot of an owl. The air was heavy with tension and an almost sacral anticipation. Under the pretext of a final system check, before the transfer, Hayes, Miller, and Sharma entered the containment area. The Bigfoot sat patiently, its immense form radiating an almost palpable calm. Its eyes, deep pools of ancient wisdom, met Hayes's, and in that gaze, he felt a profound understanding, an acknowledgement that transcended words. There was no fear, no anger, only a quiet acceptance and a knowing intelligence. As the heavy locks were disengaged and the reinforced door slowly, silently swung open, a surge of raw, elemental energy seemed to emanate from the creature. It rose to its full, imposing height, filling the space with its presence. It paused, its gaze sweeping over each of them, a silent benediction. Then it turned its massive head towards Hayes, and in that moment, a cascade of pure thought flooded his mind. It wasn't a warning this time, but a final, powerful, nonverbal communication. A profound gratitude, a poignant farewell, and a renewed, desperate plea for balance and respect for the natural world. It was a message etched deep into his very soul, a solemn vow he knew he would carry for the rest of his days. The weight of this final communion was almost unbearable, a sacred trust bestowed upon him. With a powerful, yet surprisingly graceful silent movement, the Bigfoot stepped out of the containment unit and into the night. It moved like a phantom through the shadows, its colossal form disappearing almost instantly into the inky blackness of the forest, weaving through the ancient trees as if it were a part of the very fabric of the earth. No footsteps, no rustling leaves, no broken branches. It simply vanished, reclaiming its rightful place among the primeval wilderness. For a long moment, the three stood in the empty enclosure, the silence echoing with the creature's lingering presence, a vast emptiness left in its wake, yet filled with an even vaster sense of profound purpose. The mission, as the military understood it, was unequivocally over. But for Colonel Hayes and those few who stood with him, a far more significant mission had just begun. The silence that followed the Bigfoot's disappearance back into the ancient embrace of the forest was not empty. It resonated with the weight of unspoken knowledge, a profound understanding etched into Colonel Hayes's very soul. His gaze lingered on the swaying canopy, a silent sentinel now guarding secrets far older and more profound than any military intelligence. The orchestrated chaos of the technical malfunction had unfolded precisely as planned. a masterclass in misdirection and controlled information. The fabricated equipment failures, the strategic disinformation planted amongst the scientific personnel, the subtle manipulation of data logs, all converged to create a narrative of an inconclusive mission, a tantalizing but ultimately failed endeavor. Officially, the creature had slipped away during a power surge, vanishing into the night as mysteriously as it had appeared. The formal report, meticulously crafted by Hayes, meticulously detailed the unsuitability of the environment for sustained research, citing logistical nightmares, unpredictable weather patterns, and the sheer elusiveness of the elusive subject. There was no mention of telepathy, no whispers of ancient wisdom, no prophecy of humanity's impending doom. Just the dry, factual language of a military assessment, deliberately devoid of any revelation that could shatter the world. He signed the final document with a hand that felt both steady and irrevocably changed, submitting it to his superiors with a practiced air of professional disappointment. The mission, for all intents and purposes, was closed. The Bigfoot, in the eyes of the military and the scientific community, remained an unconfirmed legend, a tantalizing whisper in the wilderness. Hayes had buried the truth, not in the ground, but in the labyrinthine corridors of bureaucracy and plausible deniability. It was a truth too vast, too disruptive, to be contained by human institutions, a truth that needed the wild's boundless freedom to survive. His resignation followed swiftly, a quiet, almost understated departure that raised few eyebrows. Colonel David Hayes, a decorated officer, had simply decided to pursue other endeavors. The official narrative spoke of a desire for a quieter life, a change of pace after years of demanding service. No one connected his sudden shift to the inconclusive Sasquatch mission, or to the profound, life-altering encounter he had experienced. He shed the uniform, the rank, the rigid structure of military life like an old skin, eager to embrace a new path, one guided by the silent wisdom of the forest and the echoing voice of a creature that had shown him the true face of humanity's folly. His life became a testament to the Bigfoot's message, though subtly, almost imperceptibly, so as not to draw undue attention. He retreated to a small, unassuming cabin, nestled deep within a temperate rainforest, not far from the very region where he had once hunted and captured his extraordinary teacher. He dedicated his days to quiet environmental activism, not through grand speeches or public protests, but through practical, hands-on conservation efforts. He worked with local land trusts, volunteered for reforestation projects, and became an ardent advocate for sustainable land use. He understood that change didn't always roar. Sometimes it whispered through the rustling leaves of a newly planted tree, or flowed in the purified waters of a protected stream. The memory of the Bigfoot was a constant companion, a silent guardian of his conscience. Its eyes, filled with ancient sorrow and profound intelligence, remained vivid in his mind. Its telepathic voice, a torrent of concepts and emotions rather than words, continued to resonate within him, shaping his every decision, influencing his every action. He saw the world through new eyes, eyes that recognized the intricate web of life, the delicate balance that humanity so carelessly threatened. He gardened organically, consumed consciously, and spoke softly, allowing his actions to speak louder than any words. He became a quiet advocate for the voiceless, a protector of the wild, driven by a truth he could never publicly share. Often, he would walk into the deepest parts of the forest, alone with his thoughts and the rustling whispers of the old growth trees. He would sit by ancient streams, feeling the pulse of the earth beneath him, a profound connection to the natural world that had once seemed so distant. He was no longer a soldier seeking to conquer or contain. He was a guardian, a listener, a humble student of the planet. He knew that the Bigfoot, wherever it now roamed, was still out there, a living legend, a silent sentinel. And he, David Hayes, was its most unexpected and most unwavering disciple. The story of the Sasquatch, its words about humanity, had not only ended his military mission, but had fundamentally redefined his entire existence. He carried the burden and the blessing of that hidden truth, forever gazing at a forest that held not just trees and wildlife, but the profound wisdom of a world beyond human comprehension. He was a man who had glimpsed eternity, and it had changed him irrevocably, making him a silent guardian of a secret that could save or condemn humanity. What do you think about this incredible story? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you want more gripping tales that challenge your perception of reality, click here for our next video.